So as Mark mentioned, I work for a small software development company in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm now moving closer to the microphone. Thanks, Sean. I work for actually for Microsoft's internal IT department. So you think of Microsoft as being a software company and a devices and a services company, and we're all of those things. But we're also just a big old Fortune 100 with tens of thousands of users and internal and external constituencies and lots of people in various line of business functions. We've got more people in marketing functions, in finance functions and whatnot, who just want to come into work every day and have their stuff work. And who come into work every day, and if their email is down, the pitchforks and torches come out and they're running down the hall after me. So in a lot of ways, when Microsoft IT thinks about deploying enterprise solutions, be it on premises or be it up in the cloud, we have a lot of the same problems, we have a lot of the same challenges as really any other Fortune 50 company that makes stuff. Probably the only real difference, I would imagine, between Microsoft IT's journey towards the cloud and many of your journeys towards the cloud is that the vendor selection part of our request for proposal, yeah, we get a really good deal on licensing. That's kind of all I'm saying. And so when we think about designing solutions for a large, diverse, complex, hybrid organization, a lot of the problems that we've been talking about for the last, and a lot of the challenges we've been talking about for the last few days, they apply to Microsoft IT as much as anyone else. And a lot of it really boils down to finding the right balance between things that might otherwise seem extreme. So finding the right balance between security and usability. That's kind of the big one everyone talks about is, you know, you've got the big dial with security on one side and usability on the other. And if you dial one up, you dial the other one down. And that's just kind of always been the way of things. But really, you just kind of need to have balance in everything you do in life. You need to have your yin and your yang. You need to have your puppies. You need to have your kitties. You need to have your offense and your defense. And Mark Diodati is sitting off to the side going, do not issue call for papers week after Super Bowl. This is as bad as it gets, folks, I promise. By the way, Brian, that's why I said I needed you here for the first 2 minutes. You were my straight man. But seriously, folks, hello, Cleveland. Security is no laughing matter. Anyone who said, whoever the person was who came up with the phrase, there's no such thing as bad publicity, they weren't thinking of this headline. This was not a good day. This inspired some full and frank exchanges of views around the halls of Microsoft IT. Conversations like, hey, IT, how could you have prevented this? What can we do to prevent this moving forward? It prompted some visceral reactions because, you know, this was kind of a, you know, well-publicized event. And some of those visceral reactions involved phrases like, can we turn on two-factor auth for all of our access tomorrow? I'm not speaking figuratively, I'm speaking literally. At one point I got asked the question, can you turn on 2FA for everything tomorrow? And if that happens to inconvenience our users, and if that happens to lock some people out, well, they're just gonna have to suck it up. Luckily, cooler heads prevailed. And we started to have rational conversations like, you know, we do employ, by and large, really smart, really technically savvy individuals, and if we put too many roadblocks in their way, they're going to find ways to get around us that we're going to wish they hadn't. I would actually posit, having said that in the age of software as a service and in the age of very easy viral SaaS adoption, I don't even think the smart and technically savvy part is even a requirement anymore. If I had thrown that kind of a security restriction in front of a completely non-technical line of business, if I had thrown that in front of, I don't know, HR or accounting or whatnot, they would have found a way around me, and it would have involved a third-party sharing service that suddenly all my data was exfilling to. You know, these are things that we did not want to have happen. And so cooler heads prevailed. We started talking about how we find balance between security and usability, how we can secure our assets while still enabling user productivity, and how we can sell that, how we can message that to our end users, to the business, and to the security office. Some of these ways that you want to manage expectations. I don't actually believe, Laura's personal belief, I don't actually believe that most people in a large enterprise actually feel that they should be able to log into applications using their Facebook creds. I mean, I think there's just a certain level of understanding that, no, you have a corporate AD credential for a reason. What we see these days, though, is that people have come to expect the Facebook experience when authenticating, which is to say, well, I just log in once and it gives me access forever. Maybe if I go and visit my cousin in Amsterdam, maybe I get prompted again, but that kind of real ease of use of authenticated, prompted once, access forever, this is the kind of expectation that we're seeing for very sensitive corporate resources. This may not be realistic. Turn on 2FA tomorrow, and if people don't like it, heck with them. This is also not realistic. Not realistic, not achievable, and again, in the age of viral SaaS adoption, would end up doing you more harm than good. There are also expectations or assumptions, I guess, from various corners of the world around what is and is not happening on your company's network. This phrase, which was actually uttered by a CISO, who shall remain nameless because I honestly don't remember, at Gartner Catalyst a few years ago. He actually made this comment during a customer case study, and I was half tempted to ask him what color the sky was in his world, and if I could come there and visit sometime, because the iron fist of IT was alive and well. God, I miss those days sometimes. So these are the kinds of things that we have to work. These are the kinds of expectations we have to manage, and it's not even just technical expectations. It's not even just technical challenge. There are process challenges. Nishant did a very good job an hour ago talking about how we saddle people and humans with very difficult processes, and with processes that maybe don't map to a mobile, complex sort of, very mobile, very complex sort of world. This is one such example. You're familiar with the Microsoft Blue Badge, which has our smart card chip on it. Because we've been issuing these things for decades, and we have these levels of assurance that have been established and have been running forever, this is how you get a physical smart card. You walk into a building in Redmond, you do the face-to-face verification with the driver's license, and you walk out with the smart card. How many Microsoft employees do you think work outside of the Puget Sound area? Tens of thousands. We have Microsoft employees who do not live on the same continent as an office that can issue a physical smart card. And I'm not even just talking Australia, the only country that gets a whole continent to itself. So, these are the kinds of things that, as we look at supporting a very mobile, very cloud-based workforce, it's not just technology, but it's also people and process, things that we need to think about. And what we need to think about is how we can make our access both easy and secure. We talked about the dial. You dial up security, you dial down usability. I really want to reject that paradigm. I want to find a way to have the rising tide floating all boats, and finding different solutions and different opportunities to do that. And we've started to make inroads here. I'm going to tell you a little story. It's not specifically related to authentication, but I think it's a really good example of working with the user community, working with the business, and not only understanding their needs and understanding their requirements, but I think it was just a really good story of, it was one of the first times that we convinced our security office that our users weren't the enemy, and that our users weren't, dumb or out to hurt us. with that set up, many of you, most of you have heard about the Microsoft company meeting that we have in the fall in Redmond. Everyone goes down to the baseball stadium. It's an all-day thing. We have execs come in. We have, product presentations. It's really cool, but it's a lot of really sensitive information because we're talking about like pre-release versions of products that we're not ready to talk about to the press or, to wonderful people like our former lovely Gartner analysts. And so for many, many years, after this whole Twitter thing turned out to not be a fad, come the company meeting, and in the run-up to the company meeting, we started getting the hand of God emails from HR and from the different product groups, and it was things like, remember, the company meeting is highly confidential, non-disclosure information. Thou shalt not tweet, blog, facey space, tweety page, just none of these things. And we had, a certain amount of success. We also had a certain number of failures. We had, things that should have been kept confidential that got sent out onto the internets before we were ready. So Microsoft IT, a couple of really enterprising developers in Microsoft IT, built an internal microblogging service. We called it Office Talk, and a couple of people started using it. A couple of more people started using it. A lot of people started using this service. It started becoming like one of the new cool ways that people internal to Microsoft could collaborate. Come the next company meeting, looking for the Hammer of God email, we get something slightly different. And it made me really, really happy. What we got instead was, hey, we're setting up this private channel on the internal Office Talk server. You want to tweet from the company meeting, you want to talk about, saw this product demo you're really excited about, want to just catch up with your friends and tell them where you're sitting, go to Office Talk. It's secured by your corporate creds. Hashtag company meeting 20 whatever year it was. And it worked really well as a way to both secure our assets, secure our resources, and to prevent the company full of geeks sitting in the baseball field going, must not tweet. Okay, maybe that was just me. So not specifically related to auth, but kind of an example of how we can move the bar forward to both enable productivity as well as security. Getting back to the smart card example, yeah, everyone's got to go to Building 92. Smart cards are a pain, and I don't know about you, but I don't know where I'm going to stick one in my phone. Surely there's a better way. Phone factor. Hey, everyone's got a phone, and as we learned from Paul Madsen, people are more likely to remember to bring their cell phone with them than to remember their password. So hey, mobile phone as authenticator. Great idea. We go to deploy. Phone factor, which was a Microsoft acquisition a couple of years ago. What did we learn? Turns out that the things we learned while we were deploying Phone Factor are many of the things that Mr. Diodati talked about in his keynote this morning, which is policy, policy, policy. Get your levels of assurance right. The actual technical deployment of Phone Factor, now Azure MFA for us, was actually fairly easy. It was all of the thought that had to go into it before we did it. And a lot of that had to do with levels of assurance, as Mark talked about this morning. Usually when the nice Phone Factor guys go to a customer, the message they bring is, today you have passwords. Tomorrow you can have phones, and that's better. The conversation they had with me was, I hear you about the phones, but today we've got smart cards. So what do I do? What do I do about that? And we had a choice. We could have created these multiple levels of assurance, like you saw on Mark's keynote slide this morning, where passwords were here, mobile was here, smart cards were there. We explicitly chose not to do that because we wanted to make strong authentication ubiquitous for our users and easy for our people to use. And part of that meant not saddling them with a user experience of, well, you can use your smart card here, but you can use your phone here, and every once in a while you're going to have this little fob that goes off, and you're not going to know why. So we chose from a user experience standpoint, to do some extra additional investment in how we were registering our phones, how we were proofing phone factor, Azure MFA, so that we could have parity between our current or our previous assurance levels for physical smart card and our assurance levels for this new authentication type. This involved work for us because the out-of-box experience at the time that we deployed, the out-of-box registration experience was username and password. Enter your username and password, register your phone, you're done. Yeah, I can't bootstrap a strong credential on the basis of a weak one. It's, kind of a transitive property problem. And so I had a couple of choices. If all I cared about was usability, I deploy phone factor with the out-of-box registration. Username and password, done. Quick, easy, cheap, costs me nothing, phone factor is deployed. Doesn't get me my level of assurance that I want. If all I care about is security, I deploy the out-of-box phone factor username and password back portal, but I stick it behind some kind of publishing mechanism that requires physical smart card. Great, everyone use your physical smart card to register your phone. Just about as fast, just about as cheap, gets me my security. But I lose usability because one of the main usability drivers for deploying this new credential type was that everyone was telling us that nobody liked to use their smart cards. And so had to think about how we were going to balance that need for security, that need for usability. Short answer is, we built a custom registration portal. This is something that we just built. It's an IAS. It's an MVC application, and we developed two different workflows where you could register your phone number backed by your smart card. You've got your smart card. You want to use it. Poof, you're done. We then developed a second registration workflow that was multi-step, 2 actors involved, so that we had a couple of chances along the way where if someone's password had gotten hacked in the middle, someone would notice. Like, we sent the user an out-of-band challenge, and then we sent it to their manager for approval. It's a little lengthier than just registering with your physical smart card, but we sent it past our security guys, we sent it by our internal auditors, and all of them said, yes, this passes the straight face test in terms of meeting your current bar for assurance levels. And so it was a win, but this cost us money. I don't want to kid you. This cost us money. This was custom development work for us. This was money that we chose to invest here rather than investing it somewhere else. I really wish I'd managed to grab your graph with the sweet spot of the usability and the whatnot, because in this case, because this is an actual example of an enterprise customer, Microsoft IT, deciding that it was worth spending the money to get both of the usability and the security out of what was at the time a fairly nascent product. A couple of other things we learned deploying phone authentication. Your mobile device has an authenticator, which is to say you get the phone call or you get the text or you get the push notification from the app. As we were deploying, we learned a couple of lessons that I have transcribed as the immutable laws of phone authentication. The user must always be expecting the challenge. If the phone rings, they better know why. It better not just be ringing randomly. Otherwise, user gets trained to just randomly accept the challenge, and you've just defeated the purpose of your mobile device as an authenticator. So what this meant from an implementation standpoint was when we looked at use cases like direct access, which is the Microsoft implementation of an auto-reconnecting virtual private networking technology where you go through a tunnel on the train, you come back up, and your direct access just immediately reconnects you. When we tried backing direct access using phone factor, it seemed like random phone calls, and we couldn't have that, so that was a use case that didn't work for us. Corollary to that, user needs to not get a bunch of phone calls in a row, because then the same thing happens. I call it phone factor fatigue. People just get inured to the phone call, and they just, fine, I'm just going to accept the auth to just shut this thing up. And so there were other use cases where this didn't quite make sense for us. We run a bunch of data centers, unsurprisingly. We have administrators who need to do strong auth to log on to a server and do some form of administrative task. I wasn't going to subject these guys to phone authentication because these guys close hundreds of tickets a day. And I couldn't have them sitting in the data center with their phone going off 100 times a day, let alone the signal problems. So, that was not necessarily a use case that worked for us. Here was the kicker. Here was the one that, I share my pain so that you don't have to experience it yourself, which is that for your mobile device to be a reasonable authenticator, it needs to be the secondary authentication. It needs to be basically the step-up authenticator. Your phone authentication service needs to be reasonably sure that you are who you say you are before it sends the challenge. Here's how I learned this one, much to my dismay. We had this new toy, and we wanted to find different use cases for it. I just rattled off two that we ruled out. But I had this new toy. Hey, I've got a hammer. Let me go find some nails. Got to go find some new nails for it. And so, okay, VPN, that works really well. Integration with our federation service, that built right into the box. That was easy. Someone happened to mention in a meeting one day, hey, what about password resets? We got a bunch of vendors who work for Microsoft who don't have chips on their smart cards, so they can't RAS in, they can't do smart card auth to do self-service password reset. Today we back all of our, or at least previously we backed all of our self-service password reset off of a smart card. This is 8,000 tickets a month. This is a major cost driver for us. Can't phone authentication help us here? Yeah, sure, we can do that. Walked away, started mocking something up, got some wireframes going. I was really kind of proud of this because it was the first time I could just play with like wireframes and be like a UX developer. It was really cool. Demoed it to a bunch of people on my team. Here's this new phone factor backed self-service password reset gate. And see, it's really cool. The user goes in, punches in their alias, they click next, they get the phone off challenge, and they get to reset their password. Has anyone figured out the oncoming train yet? One of my colleagues, who shall remain nameless, even though he's sitting right there, was sitting in this meeting, and he kind of like turned his head off to one side and started squinting. Like I should have known I was dead meat at that point, but I kept going. And I'm talking, and I'm doing the demo, and I'm talking about all the different usability stuff. Next thing I know, my phone rings in my back pocket because my wonderful colleague had gone to my demo site, punched in my alias, and clicked next. And that was all it took for the phone to ring in the first version of my brilliant SSPR scheme. Needless to say, it doesn't look like that anymore. That was a fun way to learn. I'm happier that we learned there than, somewhere that would have been on a CNN site or something, because that just would have been bad. So, random fun things. Other things we think about. Gonna kind of close off with this one. As we see increased adoption, not just of Microsoft cloud services, but also of partner and third-party cloud services, we've got all these apps that people need access to. And some of them are ours, and some of them are other people's. And so we have this notion of this portal. Andre showed you his in his demo this morning. Ping has theirs. We have ours. Microsoft has ours. I'm not going to try to sell you something from the stage. What I am going to do is talk about how Microsoft IT, as an enterprise customer, responded to our cloud service provider, Azure Active Directory, who came to us and said, hey, we've got this new portal, and we think it'll be really cool for Microsoft IT as an enterprise customer to use. Hey, Laura, what do you think? Because I've been spending a lot of time hanging out with Nishant, and Pammy, and Ian, and Andrew, my first reaction was not the one they wanted. My first reaction was a very emotional response of, that's just a big bag of passwords. I didn't actually use that phrase because Ian just coined it yesterday. But I looked at this portal and all I could think was, that's just a big bag of passwords. I don't want that because passwords need to die and we need to have, federated auth and, all of these great things. And I believe that. I do believe that. I desperately want passwords to die. I desperately want the nice FIDO people to solve this problem for me. But I'm still an IT guy, which means I need to live with the world the way it is, not just the way I want it to be. And so the advantage of, and the reason why we ended up deciding to deploy this kind of an access portal, is that it allowed us to do things like set strong authentication prior to accessing any apps within the portal. If I'm going to have a big bag of passwords, and I'm going to be stuck with that big bag of passwords for some amount of time, I don't want to just protect it with another password. I want to have strong auth in place. I want to be able to do things like, hey, 200 some odd departmental Twitter accounts in the Microsoft marketing group, why don't we build a process by which, you individual people don't have to manage those passwords anymore and shuffle them around in email when you have a new person who comes on board. Let's build a process by which we can roll those passwords for you on a regular basis and far more frequently than you're going to do it on your own. Let's do things like password check-in and check-out for people who have the, totally legitimate business need to, hey, I need to tweet as that account from my phone on the floor at TechEd. Great. And so these are, the kinds of things that, the kind of opportunities that we're looking for to try to secure ourselves in an imperfect world until Nishant kills passwords for me. And so, kind of wrapping up, I know I'm running a little bit over on time. What we're looking towards going ahead as an enterprise IT organization is, now that we've made strong auth easier by having these different ways of doing it, I do want to enforce it more broadly. I'm not going to turn it on tomorrow. I'm still not going to do that. But I do want to enforce it more broadly. And that's actually one of the advantages of having these different strong authentication types, is that by having things like your mobile device as your authenticator rather than just the card hanging off of your belt, I can start asking people to take a little bit of a usability hit to better secure their environment. And this gets back to the don't treat your users like the enemy. At the end of the day, the majority of people who work for my company are very proud of our company. And they want our company to succeed. And they're very passionate about the things they do. And if you give them a reasonable exchange of a little bit of a convenience hit to better secure company assets and thus drive up our stock prices, chances are they're going to take that deal. And so these are the kinds of things that we think about kind of moving forward. That's what I have. Red light is terribly flashing at me. Do we have time for questions, or am I way over?
I think a question or two, which is really cool. All right, I'm going to try and do this more efficiently where I actually work the mic. Who has a question? It was that encyclopedic that there are no questions?
I'll also be out in the hall. That's all good.